Well, welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Bosley. And for the better part of the past 26 years, I've had the distinct pleasure of coaching and working alongside of the world's top performers. And here what we do is we bring those ideas and their wisdom, experience, and their ideas directly to you. Do you feel sometimes that you're stuck on that hamster wheel of life and you're spinning, but you're not going in the direction or the pace you'd like? Well, if so, you've landed in the right spot. This Bamboo Lab podcast is created and broadcast all just for you, all you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. Well, today I want to give a few updates. We are currently being followed avidly and growing on 6 continents, in 25 countries, 47 states, and several hundred cities across this great nation of ours. I want to read one heart letter out today from one of our avid followers, and she said, "I love your podcast. I want you to know I think this is what you were born to do." Well, I always thought I wanted to be a stuntman when I was younger, so at least I found some kind of calling that I can thrive for. And before we get started, quite frankly, introducing one of the guests that was on my short list back in December when I started putting this together, I want to dedicate this podcast to a man of wisdom, Mr. Roy Geer. Mr. Geer was a man of wisdom, as I said, a thought leader. He was a co-author of many of the books that our amazing guest here wrote. He was the founder of the Witty Whiffy process and theory. Mr. Geer passed away on March 8th of 2017 and left behind many friends, followers, fans, and students that have continued to carry on his words of wisdom. This one's for you, Roy. Let's dissect. All right, so I got to share with the audience. When Dave Dick back in November of 2021 said, "Brian, you need a podcast. Your message is too big for the audience you have," I said, "Okay." He said, "Put together a list of people." Instantly, I put 5 people down. And this guest today, Mr. Doug Linnick, was on that short list. And finally, here in August of 2022, I got to crack through his incredibly busy schedule, and he's gracing our presence today. Before I introduce him directly, I want to share a little bit about Doug. And I have some personal stories, too, that Doug may or may not remember. But Doug is the CEO and co-founder of Think to Perform. Many of you may remember Ray Kelly in one of our previous episodes. Ray Kelly is one of the adamant leaders and members of Think to Perform as well. Doug is a legendary man for his innovative approach to developing high performance in individuals and organizations, and he's an expert at developing practical applications of the art and science of human behavior, financial and otherwise. He was a certified financial planner, but he was the executive vice president for American Express Financial, which now is Ameriprise Financial, and that's how I met Doug for the first time. And in that capacity, he led an organization of 17,000 field and corporate associates to incredible success. He has co-authored multiple books, and there are so many of them here, I had to actually write them down. One is my favorite, though, Doug. Many of his books that he's authored or co-authored are Moral Intelligence, Financial Intelligence, How to Make Smart, Values-Based Decisions with Your Money and Your Life, Moral Intelligence 2.0, How to Get What You Want and Remain True to Yourself, Leveraging Your Financial Intelligence, and my favorite, which I have a copy in my hand that is almost 30 years old, The Simple Genius You. Doug and his wife, Beth Ann, reside in Edina, Minnesota, and they have 3 children, Joan, Mary, and Alan. But before I even go into more, in November of 2000, Doug was honored by Columbia University Center for Social and Emotional Education, and he's a fellow at the Carlson Executive Development Center, Carlson School of Management, and University of Minnesota. He is also a member of the prestigious Consortium of Research on Emotional Intelligence and Organizations. Woo! You know, all of that, that's a lot, Mr. Linnick. So, Doug, I just want to take this time to tell you it's the greatest of honor to finally get to say, Doug, welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Hey, Brian, thank you. I've been looking forward to this. I was hurt that I didn't get to come on earlier.
Well, the last thing I want to do is hurt Doug Linnick's feelings. I'm so excited to share
I'm
some
a sensitive 90s kind of guy locked in this new millennium. So.
I'm looking forward to sharing a couple of the stories that I have shared, one on the air prior, but I have a couple of stories that how you impacted my life and my career, and probably unbeknownst to you. But Before we get started, I know a lot about you because I got the chance to meet you back when I was a young training manager with American Express Financial back in the 90s. I got to meet you a couple times, and they were great honors that I never forgot. But then I followed you religiously over the course of the past 30 years. But my audience needs to know a little bit about who Doug is. Can you share with us? Who's Doug Linick?
Well, yes, I often refer to myself as a simple guy from North Dakota. I was born in North Dakota, and I lived early part of my life in North Dakota. My family moved to southwestern Minnesota when I was in high school, but I went to one of the weird things that actually contributed to both some good things and some bad things relative to how I have become who I am today. But I went to 8 different schools from grades 1 through 12. And so I moved around a lot, and that both contributed to me gaining some self-confidence, but it also contributed to me dealing with the trauma of and so some of that was bad, some of it was good, but there's trauma associated with moving around all the time, but there's benefits too. And so I'm that guy. So I grew up there. My grandfather was an immigrant, essentially from Odessa. So now Odessa has been in the news because of everything going on in the Ukraine and in Russia. But my grandfather and his family at the time, he was a boy then, they immigrated to the United States, ended up settling in Hebron, North Dakota, spelled like Hebron.
Okay.
And legend has it is our great ancestry were Jewish people that were exiled by the Tsar. Kind of the story of Fiddler on the Roof, which interestingly, later in life, many years after that that migration occurred, my son actually played Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, and he subsequently married a Jewish woman and converted to Judaism. But the word is that our family originally was Jewish, and so that's an interesting fact. That's who I am. I don't know. So I ended up in North Dakota and eventually Minnesota. And we grew up, in a modest, I lived in a little town. My sister and I shared the same bedroom until I was in we didn't get to have separate bedrooms until I was in the 4th grade, and she was in the 7th grade. And there were just 2 of us. My mother was the 11th of 21 children. So that's kind of an interesting thing, that not a lot of families that big. And when I started school, I had 2 uncles and 2 aunts in school with me. So there you go.
11 of 22 children?
21. Well, there were 22 actually, but one died at birth, so that baby didn't get counted.
Okay, wow.
But there were 22 births.
Wow.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Get the latest insights from top mortgage pros on Mortgage Connects, a podcast by MGIC. We interview thought leaders from across the industry to share their wide-ranging expertise and candid views on critical market developments and current housing trends. Our guests reveal highly effective marketing and referral strategies, training tips and best practices, and what you can expect from the mortgage market in the future. Hear from experts like best-selling author Todd Duncan, U.S. Bank's Lenny McNeil, and Freddie Mac's Danny Gardner. Listen to Mortgage Connects on your favorite app or at mortgageconnects.com today.
You'd never hear of that anymore. I don't know that I've ever heard of that, Doug.
Yeah, well, my grandfather was a sharecropper. My mother's dad, and these were all farmhands. This was basically, and the way it worked with my family until like when I started school, the younger Lapps, that was a Lapp family, were allowed to go through high school. But prior to that, my mother included, my mother being the 11th of the 21, the girls were allowed to go to school for 8 years and the boys only 4.
Okay. Because
the boys could go to work on the farm sooner, or so my grandpa thought. And so that's where we came from. And my paternal grandfather, who migrated to Hebron, he worked on the railroad. And interestingly, he was one of the people. They were German, of German descent, living in Odessa. But when he came and ultimately joined the military, he served in the U.S. Army in a German unit, and my grandpa could not speak English. And that whole unit of people, they were fighting the Germans in World War I. And it was a German-speaking group fighting the German army. So, and when my dad started school, he couldn't speak English. When I started school, they wouldn't let us speak German. So, so it's interesting. That's just a childhood life. But everybody that's listening to your podcast all over the world, they have their own stories, and all of our stories shape us. Our history shapes us into, influences us to be. I don't believe in determinism, but I do believe that we are heavily influenced by our DNA, by our ancestors, by our environment.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you grew up sharing a bedroom with your sister, and that was very common. I know I shared a bedroom with 2 of my brothers, but they were much older than I am. So I finally got a bedroom to myself when my brother, who's 10 years older, went on to college and moved on. So, but when you grew up in that, coming from a grandfather who was a sharecropper, your mother was 11 of 21 children. You were born in North Dakota, but then you moved and you were in 8 schools from grade 1 to 12. You had some trauma with that. I mean, obviously, you gained self-confidence, but it's probably difficult to gain roots anywhere. So during all of that time of where Doug Linick was being formed and groomed into the man you are now, who was your greatest inspiration, Doug?
Well, I would say, actually my father was probably my greatest inspiration. And, when my dad was a very interesting guy, much more versatile, if you will, than I. I was lucky to be born when I was, because I've made a living talking. I actually can't do much. My dad, on the other hand, was a brilliant guy, but he was also gifted. He built the house that we lived in. He built the furniture in the house that we lived in. He was winning awards for, from Popular Mechanics and Mechanics Illustrated for all of his capabilities with regard to that. He taught in a one-room schoolhouse. He taught all the grades in a one-room schoolhouse. And he became a banker, and he kept changing. He kept looking for opportunities, and he kept focusing on growing and trying to advance his career and make a better life for his family. And that's why we moved so often, is he kept jumping around. So he went from teaching schools, he did auto body work, he did, he became an accountant. And I learned a lot just by being around him. So I would say probably my dad was my biggest hero growing up, and my whole family, my grandfather, and, I didn't get along well with my maternal grandfather. He died when I was very young, but we didn't have a great relationship when I was a little kid. I think he got tired of kids by the time I was born. So he already had 21 kids. And I hung around a lot with my the Lennox grandparents. Interestingly, the two families ended up living one block apart. So it's totally coincidental in this little town called Hebron.
Okay.
So he was my hero.
Well, I'm assuming you got most of your drive for constant, continuous personal development and your gift and your desire to learn from your father. You must have just seen that and kind of encompassed that as you watched him do so many different things.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, Brian, one of the things that was interesting is my dad passed away in 2009. My mother died as a result of a car accident in 1996. But prior to my dad's death a few years earlier, he had said to me, Doug, if I predecease you, which he did, I'm still alive. He said, if I predecease you, I would like to be cremated and buried next to your mother. I'd like my urn to be buried next to your mother. And I want on my gravestone, I would like you to write the words, and yet I am still learning. And so it's interesting. And I'm actually sitting here in my office, and there is a piece of art. I'm going to see if I can grab it real quickly.
Please do.
And it was by Goya. That was given to me. Somebody heard me give a speech and talk about this. And it's called On Apprendo, which essentially means, and yet I'm still learning. And sorry about that. I had to take a look at that. And somebody that heard me speak, in fact, the collaborative writer of some of my books was listening to my conference speech. She was not attending in person, but rather virtually, and sent me this piece of art. It's just unbelievable, but it really represents how I think about things, and yet I am still learning, and I continue to really be blessed by that lesson from my dad.
I love that statement, and yet I am still learning. And that's on your father's tombstone, right? Engraved on it?
Yes.
That's remarkable. I think I found the title for today's podcast. Because I think that encompasses everything I know about you as well, Doug. That's wonderful. What a role model to have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Mr. Lennox for making inspiring a man that has become who you are today. That's fantastic.
Well, there's good and bad about me, but we all have that.
Well, I only see the good, Doug.
Good.
You've gone through a lot in your career. You've been around in this industry of finance and then professional and personal development, cultural development, and created so many amazing concepts and theories and strategies. Over the past 3 years, as our country in the world has gone through the COVID and the pandemic and the social distancing, what do you think has been your greatest learning during that time period, Doug?
Well, I would say one of the things that happened as a result of COVID is the way in which we conduct business changed. And I learned that you could go faster than you thought. Some things that I thought would take years, you had to make happen in months. So I learned that I could accelerate my own growth and the growth of our business, and that was encouraging. And there's a few other things that I'm learning. One of my more recent repeated statements that is getting a little bit of traction. I hope your listeners find this beneficial, but I am learning that there is no end to better. When years ago I had the opportunity when the book Fred Kuehl and I wrote, Moral Intelligence, came out in 2005, and that book was you've got listeners across the world. That book's been published in 13 languages, and I hope some of your listeners have had a chance to read it in their native language rather than English. But when I met Jim, my book had come out, his book had come out, From Good to Great, and we were speaking at a CEO, a conference for bank CEOs somewhere in like Indian Wells or somewhere like that. And I got to spend some time with Collins, and he had, wrote the book From Good to Great. It was a terrific book, and I got a lot out of talking with him in addition to what he says in that book. But what I've been learning in these last 3 years is going from good to great is wonderful, but there's no end to better. So I don't know if I'm going to write the book, but in my head, I'm thinking from good to great to better is, and as long as everyone accepts there is no end to better, there is the progress, not perfection, is what I see, because there is no perfect. There is the best in class, but there's no perfect.
Right.
Because if I was the genie in a lamp and you were to possess the lamp, and then you would pull me out of the lamp by rubbing however they do that in the lamp thing, they rub the lamp and out comes the genie and out I pop and I grant you a wish. At the end of the first day of you living in the world you wished for, you will notice that this could be better. Mm-hmm. That, and you've probably heard me say this years ago, as I used to say it all the time, is the human condition is such that we will always see problem and opportunity in our circumstance. And that's a gift if we accept it as a gift. If we accept that we are our nature as human beings is to always see both what's wrong and what could be. There's always a problem. And all you can do in life, all I can do in my life is improve my problems. I will never be problem free because I will be able to see the problems and the opportunities in whatever circumstance I'm in. And the older I get, the more I am learning how true that is. And I really like the fact that you're using that word learning, because knowing is the enemy of learning. And so one of the things I am learning is to try to avoid saying I know too much. Because once I declare I know it, then I'm shutting myself off from learning more about it. And there's always more to learn. And I don't remember where it came from, but if you can imagine this, in fact, all your listeners can do this right now. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, put a dot right in the paper and imagine that in that dot is everything that you know. And the edges of the dot touches that space around the dot of things you don't know. You think, oh, here's some stuff I don't know, I must learn. And so we learn that stuff that touches our dot, and we convert our dot into a circle. And everything we know is in that circle. But everything we know we don't know touches the circle. And now we expand the circle again and again and again and again. And when you get to my age, I'm now 70 years old, I am now really aware there's a whole heck of a lot I don't know. I mean, I know quite a bit, or I know a lot. I know about some stuff, but there is a lot I don't know, and that's a gift, and that's why the human appetite for growth is insatiable. I cannot get enough. I want to keep growing. Knowing is the enemy of learning, and yet I'm still learning. There is no end to better. Those are some of my greatest thoughts these days.
And Doug, this is exactly why you were on my short list at the beginning of my podcast career. I want to encapsulate real quickly some of the things Doug said for the audience in the Bamboo Lab podcast out there. And there's not going to be any particular order because I have now filled up a piece of paper and I pulled up another one. So I think what I got out of this, quite frankly, was what Doug just capsulated himself, is knowing is the enemy of learning. If you did that dot exercise and expanded that circle, you'll get it. I did it on a sticky note here that I'm gonna revamp that again when we get done today. I think that's amazing that there is no end to better. I think a lot of us out there get so disgruntled and discouraged, and we tend to see problems that we face or setbacks as failure. In reality, we're not trying to achieve perfection. We're just trying to make progress. We're that bamboo seed. We plant it every day and it grows a little bit every day. And finally you get some exponential growth, but we're never going to reach that true, nirvana of life where everything is exactly the way we want. And yet, as his dad said, and yet I'm still learning every day. I just think, having a father and a role model like Doug has had in his life, I would challenge all of you to look back on your role models of your life. Have we forgotten the messages that they sent to us, the messages they delivered to us over the course of time? And yet, and again, who are you role modeling for? Who are the people out there that you can be like Doug's father was to him? Because it may be your child, it may be a grandson, it could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be someone you work with that you can role model and teach them, even whether through your words or your actions. Because there is no end to better. And I love this. The human condition is such that we will always see problems and opportunities in our circumstances. And then what he said after that was what I got of it. And that is a gift. So sometimes when we see the opportunities in life, we see that as a gift, but also seeing the problems of life, that's a gift as well. So thank you so much, Doug. I love that.
Oh, and by the way, I should mention, this was kind of funny when you were talking about the simple genius. Most of the simple genius, most of that was, and it's for the listeners, it's a very simple book. And the book is called The Simple Genius You in parentheses. The reader is the genius, not the author. You are the genius. You, the listener, you are the genius. Because the genius in you is the person who has figured out that happiness is a state of mind, not a state of affairs. And there are many happy people all over the world who don't have what one would think of as terrific states of affairs. They just have the right state of mind. So as long as we honor our value system, as we live in alignment with our values and with guiding principles, then we earn our happiness. And that book, The Simple Genius You, most of that was written 46 years ago. I was 24 years old when I wrote most of that book. And my intent when I wrote that book, and I find it's wonderful to hear, Brian, that you find it to be the favorites of the books that I've written. I appreciate that because I like it a lot too. But it's a lot of the wisdom that I wanted it to be timeless. And this particular book, oddly enough, has been having a recent resurgence. We're getting people ordering the book all the time. It's an easy read. I think that's part of it. It's short. And a lot of the lessons that I share and the various theories I advance in that book came from my childhood in North Dakota. But that book's 46 years old. My son is 46 years old.
Well, my copy
wasn't published until 1984.
That's the copy
when it was published.
I have the fourth printing, copyright 1984, in my hand.
Yep, that was when it first came out in 1984. Because I didn't publish it because I didn't know for sure that the messages would be timeless. I wanted to write a book where the messages would last. And so I decided intentionally to sit on it for a while. Now, I was already young. I was 24. And so I sat on it until I was 32. And I thought, well, I'm pretty old now. And that's a wonderful thing about aging is we all have never been older than we are right now. And so there I was, age 32. I'd never been any older than that. I figured, all right, looks like this is something that people could use for many years. And I'm pleased to say now that it's 46 years old, that the book is still sharing messages with people that are valuable in 2022.
Well, I want to share a real quick story with the audience because, Doug, you may or may not remember this, but it might have been, it was between 5 and 6 years ago. I pulled this book back out, and I try to read it every year. I love the dish rag concept of being dish ragged and dish ragging other people. I love the two bridge theory. and if you look, if the audience and you could see the inside of this book, Doug, it looks like a Swiss watch because I have words and highlights and arrows and diagrams all over this thing. And so many of these are from my career as a training manager when I was building this Market Pulse program at American Express back in the early 90s or mid 90s. But so, audience, several years ago, I wanted to get a copy of this book for Dawson, my son. And I really wanted an autographed copy. So I emailed Doug and I mentioned that to him. He said, well, send us your address. And I did. And he sent in the mail an autographed copy from himself to Dawson. And Dawson still has that book in he's got a very small library compared to mine, but he still has that book in his library and has read it as well. So, he's coming home on Sunday to go back to college. He's been living 6 hours away doing landscaping. So I'm going to have him pull that out while he's home for a week before he goes off to school. And we're going to read that book together again.
That's great. Where's he going to school?
He goes to Northern Michigan University.
Oh, terrific.
So
well, you tell Dawson I said hi.
I will definitely. Well, you just said it because he listens to the podcast.
Hi, Dawson. Glad you read the book. I hope you even liked it.
Oh, yeah, he did. He was a little younger than I was when I read it. I was 23 when I first read it. And when we went into management at Ameriprise Financial under John Hance's tutelage, he said there are 4 books you have to read. One was Atlas Shrugged. One was Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun. One was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the other one is The Simple Genius You. And I bought them all and read them right away. And this is the only one. Well, actually, that and 7 Habits, I still have that original copy as well. So
yeah, it was interesting because I had the good fortune of knowing Stephen Covey, and lately we've been doing some work with Stephen's 7 Habits. Covey actually was kind enough to endorse the book Moral Intelligence because I met him in 1990. The book, The 7 Habits, was published in 1989. And we actually we hired Covey to speak at one of our conferences. And at that time, I was relatively new to running the advisor business for what was then IDS. We hadn't changed to American Express Financial Advisors and, of course, not Ameriprise, which it is today. But Covey and I had lunch after he spoke about 7 Habits, and I was talking about the alignment model, which I know, Brian, you're very familiar with. Mm-hmm. And Covey made the observation that my alignment model parallels his private victory habits, that they're exactly the same thing, and different words saying the same thing. And then over the years, Covey and I had an opportunity to spend some time together. And when Fred and I decided to write Moral Intelligence, I asked him if he would be willing to endorse the book. And he was very, very generous and willing and endorsed our book, which I feel so blessed to have him had done that. And so it was very much an honor. But he had such great wisdom, and so it's kind of fun to have you read that book, because I'm doing some work with John Hance's group, and we are in fact talking about the 7 Habits and The Simple Genius.
To me, there are so many books, and I'm an avid reader, Doug, as you are. And one of the things I've realized over the course of my past 26 years of coaching and speaking and now podcasting is that we don't have to continue to read new books all the time. Sometimes it's going back to the classics, the ones that really had an amazing impact on our lives. And The Simple Genius You, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the Jonathan Livingston Seagull were 3 ones that were books that I really, even Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun. These are books I try to read every single year just to continue to keep that groundwork and that foundation established, and not to forget the things that started me off on the path in which I'm on now. So Yours is right up there. And I also have read Moral Intelligence and Financial Intelligence, and I just put How to Get What You Want and Remain True to Yourself in my cart on Amazon. So I'm going to continue my Doug Lennox research and studies.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. In the bucket of shameless self-promotion, I appreciate that. Thank you.
The pleasure is mine. I want to share one other story, and because I have 3 or 4 stories of you, Doug, and the audience doesn't know this, and I know you and I talked about it in our pre-phone call before we went recording today. But when I was a young, I think 3 months into my career as a financial advisor with which was called IDS Financial Services back then, you would go to Chaska, Minnesota for, I think it was 10 days or something, where we would learn all these amazing things. And then there was this one morning, and I was 2 or 3 months into my career. I was right out of college, and they said, okay, tomorrow morning, 7:00, everybody meet at this location on this campus, and you're going to have daybreak with Doug. And I thought, what is daybreak? Why 7:00 in the morning? Daybreak with Doug. And I can still remember, and of course, back then I was a fairly shy young man. I sat in the far right corner. And I remember when Doug came in and started talking, you could drop a pin. You could hear a pin drop in the audience. And he spoke for an hour on just primal success habits. And then when you left, you got a cassette tape that was Daybreak with Doug. And for years, I would put that cassette tape in my car as I would drive north to visit my daughter or go home for the weekend to see my family, which was about 4 hours drive north for me. And I would listen to that over and over and over. And I have lost the tape in the course of time. And I wish I had a copy of that on tape or a cassette. I don't care if it's on 8-track. I'll find a medium to play it on. But that moment was a defining moment. And hearing that voice of Doug, and you guys have all seen his cadence and the way he speaks is just so wise, but yet so calming. You know, as Bill Williams said in our podcast a few weeks ago, he is the true gentleman of character. And so I do miss not having that tape in my car. So if I can find a copy, if anybody out there has a copy, please email me at brian@bamboolab3.com. I'll buy it from you, or I'll dub it if you have it.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you. I'll check with Kay May. You remember Kay?
Yes, I do.
Kay's still working with me. This is our 43rd year together.
Wow. Yes, I'm so impressed with her follow through. So Kay May, thank you so much for getting this set up, because your follow through is impeccable. And I have a lot of follow through experiences, some good, some bad. Yours was right there at the top. Doug, I have a question for you that I ask all my guests, and that is, over the course of your life, you said 70 years on the planet, you've gone through so many amazing journeys. What is the most difficult thing you've gone through in your life?
Well, the most difficult thing for me was when, I was one of those guys that during, after the pandemic hit and we started to not be working, live and in person. And I'm a extrovert, and being with people was always important to me. And I ended up spending, about 6 weeks. Just before the everything got shut down. My wife and I had traveled down to our home in the desert, and we're in the Palm Springs area. And I was down there. Also had some business in Scottsdale while we were there. And then all this stuff started to happen, and they shut down the tennis tournament that would have been there in Indian Wells. And my wife ended up coming back. I ended up staying. And frankly, I became one of those guys that had too much time on his hands. And I became one of those people that helped fuel liquor sales. I drank too much. And I got to the point where I started to develop, speaking of habits, I developed a habit of drinking. Mm-hmm. And I eventually, came to the realization with the help of my family that I shouldn't drink anymore. So I had to quit drinking. And probably the most difficult thing was to discover that a lot of, when you start getting afflicted by something like alcohol or I imagine could be drugs, but in my case was alcohol, that you can lose your sense of direction a little bit. And that's when I started to realize that living in alignment is not a lifetime achievement award. I mean, I've lived 70 years, and I've been in alignment the vast majority of those years and the days within the years, where I'm aligning my behaviors, I'm behaving consistent with my goals and consistent with my values. What I found is when I was drinking, I kind of lost direction. I continued to say the same things, and I could continue to teach, but my own direction got lost. And so the use of these tools, that all the things that I have been teaching others, I developed originally to deal with me, and then I passed them on to other people. And I found that all of those tools are the things that became my sense of getting back on track. So I now, and I know for sure, because I've both been in alignment and I've been out of alignment, I know for sure that the tools work, that if we pay attention to ourselves, out of self-awareness, we can make better decisions. If we make better decisions, we can align ourselves, we can manage ourselves better. And if we manage ourselves better, we will have better relationships with other people. And I am so energized right now, and I am feeling so good about where I'm at. And I am realizing I'm a lot younger at age 70 than I thought I would be. And I'm enjoying my learning, and I'm enjoying being a student, a teacher, a practitioner. I always talk about student, practitioner, teacher. Mm-hmm. And I encourage all of us to be all three of those. You are, Brian. You are somebody who studies all this stuff, but you practice it. You're not just interested in it from a book. You're interested in it for practical application. So you use this stuff, and then you become a teacher. So, and one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So that was probably my darkest days of my life. Now some of the most disappointing days were things like the death of my mother and things like that. But the worst part of my life, no question about it, was when I was drinking too much. And I lived my whole life without drinking too much. So it's easy to fall down everybody wants to be in a groove. No one wants to be in a rut. And what I don't want is to have, anything be a rut for me,
right.
Including drinking. And so that was the toughest time. That was a great question. Well, I don't know if my answer works.
I am so honored that you were so transparent with that. I think it goes back to what you said earlier. It's about progress, not perfection. I know for a fact that I too, during COVID, in the social distancing, the quarantine, raising my son, he was a junior and senior, and he told me, Dad, you drank a lot during that time. And, it's one of those things I didn't realize. I was sitting home and I'd be on the phone with friends and I'd crack a beer or a bourbon. And I think I lost some of my identity during that time. And I always say, and I also physically was paying the price. I put on what I call my quarantine 15, and thankfully I've taken it off since then. But it was a time I think a lot of us really learned who we were. And many of us fell and never got up, and some of us fell and got back up to being better where we were in a better position than we were before the whole process started. So thank you for sharing that, Doug. You've been talking with the alignment model, and I think my audience is probably sitting at the edge of their seats wanting to know a little bit more about that. Can you share with us the alignment model so the listeners can understand a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. And, I'll preface that by saying the most effective people I know, the most effective leaders I know, live in alignment and on purpose. And so I'll talk about what that means. And by the way, you were talking about leadership and role modeling. And I don't want to break it to your audience, but I imagine most of them have figured this out. But we are all role models.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get to not be. The only thing you get to decide is what kind of role model you want to be. You are a role model. You are an influencer. And my own definition of leadership is that which one does to influence the behavior of another. And leadership and management are not the same thing. Leadership is about people. Management is about things. I manage things, I lead people. All of us are leaders because all of us influence people. Now, we are also all followers because all of us are also influenced by people, and by things. I'm influenced by that which I read. I'm influenced by that which I watch. I'm influenced by my environment. I'm influenced by who I hang out with. Those are the influences in my life. And the most effective people actually choose. They are selective on the influences. And you talked about it. Rather than read 18,000 books, maybe you read 10 books 18,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
And you really gain a depth of understanding. So you're choosing those books to be influences in your life. So one of the best ways to become a better leader is to become a better follower. And so I get to pick. I can choose to be influenced by Brian Bosley. All of your listeners have chosen to be influenced by you and by the guests you bring on. And all of your listeners, every one of them, 100% of them, are influencing somebody else. And so you, the listener, I, the speaker, we are all influencers and we are all influenced. The most effective influencers, the most effective leaders live in alignment and on purpose. So what does that mean? It's a 3-frame model. So I'll just describe it. People can write it down if they want. And I'm going to go from left to right. On the left side, just put a little box, a little rectangle. And on the top of that box, write the word ideal self. All of us have an ideal self. And ideally, we're all pretty wonderful. Our ideal self is the person that is principle-based, using Covey's language, understands their values and lives in alignment with them. So in that box, we put principles and values. And then in the middle box, at the top of that box, and you mentioned the acronym, so I'm going to use it here, write the initials WDY, WFY. Witty, whiffy is how that's pronounced. What do you want for yourself? And in the box, write the words goals and purpose. And then in the far right box, at the top of that box, write the word real self. So the first box is ideal self. The third box is the real self. And in that box, write the words thoughts, emotions, and actions. My thoughts are real. My emotions are real. My actions are real. My physical experience is real. I'm not talking right or wrong. I'm simply talking real. Now, the most effective influencers, the most effective leaders, the most effective role models think what they need to think, do what they need to do, regardless of how they feel, so that they can achieve their goals, honor their sense of purpose, consistent with their principles and values, with the principles that guide them and their personal values. And principles are universal truths. and as Covey would say, they essentially represent true north. These are human principles. They apply to humankind, regardless of gender, ethnicity, location on the globe, or religious belief. All of that, there are principles. And when Fred Keel and I wrote Moral Intelligence, we were making the business case for moral principles. Fred Luskin wrote a book called Forgive for Good. One of our principles is forgiveness, and he makes the health case for forgiveness. And of course, there's many that can make a social case, a religious case, but we make a business case, and we identify 4 principles that exist. And the way and I won't get into how we came up with these 4. Unless people have a question, they're certainly welcome to contact me, and I'd be happy to respond. But integrity, responsibility are 2 principles of the head, and compassion and forgiveness are 2 principles of the heart. And so we need to align. And when I was drinking too much, I was out of alignment with my own sense of integrity. I've always considered myself to be a highly integrous person, and yet I would, when I was drinking too much, I would lie about, did you have a drink? No, I didn't, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I was out of alignment, and I was not being responsible for myself. I wasn't accepting I have to be responsible. So fortunately, I have been able to forgive myself. And by the way, listeners might enjoy this. Amongst other things, forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. So if you are still trying to improve your past, I encourage you to give it up. You will not be able to improve your past. So I forgive myself for my past, and I hold myself accountable for my present. I am shaping my tomorrow with what I do today. If you want to understand your current condition, whatever physical condition, mental condition, financial condition, if you want to understand your current condition, look into your past behaviors. If you'd like to predict your future condition, look into your present behaviors. And if you'd like the future to look different than your present behaviors suggest they will be, your condition will be, then the solution is to change your behaviors in the present. We behaved our way into being the person we are right now. And if we want to become a better person, which there is no end to better, then we're going to have to continually make changes. So I have to continue to make the changes necessary in my behaviors today to be the person I want to be, ideally. So the most effective people live in alignment and on purpose. My purpose is to help myself and others achieve our highest and greatest potential. Why did I accept this opportunity to be on your podcast? The answer is twofold. One, I have respect for you and everything that you've been doing these last years, and that you continually have reached out and have shared things with me, and I've benefited from it. And the other is I want to be of service. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing right now with you is I am living in alignment and on purpose. What I am doing is both purposeful, I'm doing it on purpose, and it's with a purpose. My purpose is to help myself and all of the people who are listening, help myself and others achieve our highest and greatest potential. And there is no end to better. So we will get there closer, and we will see there's better. I can get better. I'm 70. I'm excited about being 70. I'm looking forward more than ever to being 80, because I can't wait to see how much I will grow in the next 10 years.
I mean, I don't.
So that's the alignment model.
I don't thank you, Doug. I don't think I have to capsulate what you said. I think that right there, what you said is so powerful that I'm just going to simply say to the audience, go back and listen to this section when I asked Doug, listen to it all again, but listen to this one more than once, twice, 3 times when I asked him to describe the alignment model. This is life-changing wisdom right here. I do have one question, Doug. You had said the 4 principles. The principles of the head are integrity and responsibility.
Yes.
Principles of the heart are, was it compassion? And I missed the other one.
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Okay. I love the statement. Forgiveness is about giving up all hope for a better past.
Yes.
That's so freeing for people.
People get stuck in the past and they can't forgive themselves, or they can't forgive somebody else. And by the way, the primary beneficiary of the forgiveness process is the forgiver, not the forgivee. Right.
I agree. For the audience out there, I'm going to put this in text form at the base of the podcast, so you'll have it also in written form. But I think you can research this on your own. Looking at Doug's book, Moral Intelligence, or just Doug or Google Doug Lennox, go to Think to Perform. Just start researching this, because this is the first time, Doug, and this is my 38th episode, my second one today, recorded podcast. I've never gone on to 3 pages of notes. So I had to turn a page over to write the alignment model on. So I think the audience is going to be wanted to do a great deal more research than just listening today. And I'm going to truly propagate that concept of them doing more research. Doug, you with all the things you've done, and you're at 70 now, looking forward to 80. You've coordinated with, the heads of the industry, with Stephen Covey, Jim Collins, Daniel Goldman. These are, people that have written books that have changed the world. And I've read every one of the books. I've Built to Last, Good to Great, Emotional Intelligence, obviously many of Covey's books. What's next for you?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, I am about to sign my agreement with the publisher for my most recent book that I co-authored with Chuck Wachendorfer. And that's exciting. And so I'm doing that. I have it right here. The contract is sitting. I'm holding it in my hand right now. And the title of the book is "Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It." That's the title. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. And the subtitle is 8 Essentials for Enhancing Your Leadership Impact at Home, at Work, Home, and Anywhere Else That Needs You.
When will that be published?
Actually, that'll be interesting, because I signed this, and then the book is written, and my publisher will be Wiley. They published the last book, Leveraging Your Financial Intelligence, and they will publish this book. And Wiley's a great publisher. I'm sure many people have read many of the books published by Wiley. Chuck Wachendorfer is my co-author. My collaborative writer is continuing to be Kathy Jordan. She captures my voice, and in this case, our voice, really well. And we've been working on this for the last several years. And the process of working on this book, and the process of revisiting everything that I know about dealing with me, has been hugely helpful to me in these last couple of years. And I've been on a great growth spurt. So it's kind of exciting to be in your early 70s and be on a growth spurt. I'm not getting taller, and I'm not even getting heavier, I will say. So I actually had to go out and buy a bunch of new sports coats, because I'm losing some weight. So that's a nice problem.
Not a bad way to spend money when you're 70, or not a bad way to spend money anytime when you're getting more fit. Well, for the audience out there, to let you know, August 25th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, I will be interviewing Chuck Wachendorfer himself on the Bamboo Lab podcast. So that episode will be aired sometime in late August. So we'll be looking forward to hearing his wisdom as well. I want to share one more story, Doug, that you probably heard me say this if you listen to the Bill Williams podcast, but in some of the audience, the returning audience has heard, but this story was what made me really look at Doug from a completely different perspective and in such a higher light of respect and credibility. I was a very young training manager out of Livonia, Michigan, and Doug was a legend. And whenever he visited our market group in the Detroit region, it was a buzz, and you could just tell, hey, Doug Linux in the market group, and I think he's going to be in my office this afternoon. I heard he's going to be up here, tomorrow, and it was a particular Tuesday. I think it was a Tuesday that for some reason that date sticks in my head that day. And I was training. I think I had 28 new advisors. I was a brand new training manager, district manager. I can't remember. I was 27 years old or so. And we were in the Livonia office training room, and I was doing my morning 2-hour, whatever it was, training on sales and marketing. And somebody came in and said, "You have to leave. Doug Linux in the building. He needs this room." And I thought, oh my goodness. So we start gathering up our stuff, and I said, "Okay, everybody start marching out. Go back to your cubes. We'll figure this out." And you walked in as I was walking out, and you had a handful of people with you, and you said something to the effect of, "Where are all you people going?" I said, "Well, we were told we have to leave. You needed the training room or the conference room," we called it. And you said, "No, wait a minute. You guys go back in there. You guys are the ones doing the work and making the money. We'll find a smaller room." And we did. We went back and filtered back in, and you and your team went and found a smaller conference room in the building. And I couldn't believe that. That was 27 or 28 years ago. And that story and that memory has stuck with me, Doug, and I've told so many people, whether in private coaching or in just personal conversations or in some of my speaking engagements, that to me is leadership. Because at that moment, you turned from being a guru, icon, legend to a man of the people who really gets it. And when I shared that story with Bill Williams, he's the one who said, Doug is just a true man of character. And so I want to thank you for that, because that made me a better man and a better leader, as that story has filtered through my brain so many thousands of times over the past 20 some years.
Well, thank you. I like that story. That's a nice story. I'm humbled by hearing that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Doug, the last question I'll ask, is there any question that I didn't ask that you would like me, or I should have, or is there any final message you want to leave with the Bamboo Lab audience?
No, I mean, I can understand why you've attracted such a large following all over the world. You're great. You didn't leave any questions on the table that I was thinking about. I mean, I will say it's more of a repeat than anything else, but I would say to all of your listeners that our opportunity to pursue the potential that is within us is very, very real. And as you think about yourself and you think about others, I have next to me, I'm actually holding it right now, one of my colleagues, Dave Meldal, who works with Think to Perform, and he works out of Bozeman, Montana. He gave me this that we use to fan a fire. And one of my thoughts about the bellows, one of the reasons I've used that as a metaphor is when I meet people. So when I meet the Brian Bosleys of the world or the Dawson Bosleys of the world, or anybody, I am looking into their chest cavity, and I am looking for a flame. And that flame to me represents potential and goodness. And everybody has both. We have goodness and we have potential to be better. And I consider it an honor to be the bellows. There are two ways to get at that flame. It might even just be a little burning ember. The flame might not even be burning. But just like I would with a fire, I'm going to fan that ember until it breaks into a flame. And then I'm going to keep fanning that flame until it consumes the body. So as it relates to oneself, fan your flame, be your own bellows, and be the bellows to those that you have an opportunity to influence. Look for what's good and look for their potential. Two ways to get at the flame. One is to fan it. The other way is to beat up the rest of the body. And that's what a lot of unfortunate people are experiencing, is they're experiencing somebody else beating up the bad part of them, thinking if I beat the bad out of you, the good will come out. And that doesn't work. That has a snuffing out effect. So if I beat up your body, it'll snuff out that flame that you have. But if I fan it, the flame will grow. So it's a different way to look at our role in dealing with ourselves and our role in dealing with others.
I'm just trying to
be the bellows.
Be the bellows. All right, I'm writing this down. You know, it's interesting. Every time I do a podcast, Doug, within the words of the guest, I find a podcast title for that episode, and I don't know which one I'm going to choose now. So you made my job a little more difficult.
Well, I'm glad you've made my job simple and easy. And by the way, simple and easy are not synonyms. So, so a lot of things are simple and not yet easy. But this was simple and easy.
Well, thank you so much.
And they're not the same. A lot of the simplest things are the hardest things. You know, and one of my mentors who you mentioned and dedicated this show to, Roy Gear, used to tell me all the time, he said, there are three levels of understanding, Doug. There is simplistic, there is complex, and there is profoundly simple. And until you get to profound simplicity, it's not very useful. And so I endeavor to simplify things on the other side of complexity. And that's what I hope to do. And I hope I've accomplished at least a little bit of that with your listeners today.
I can honestly share, I believe, knowing that my listeners and the heart letters that continue to flood in, that this is exactly what you did today. I know you did it for me. And I have to say that 30 years ago, sitting there and listening to you speak in Chaska, Minnesota, and getting that little cassette, Daybreak with Doug, that I never would have dreamed that 30 years later I was getting a more advanced version of Daybreak with Doug, and I was getting it live, talking to you person to person. So, my friend, I can't thank you enough. You have been an inspiration to me, and I literally mean that, through your writings and your words and your follow through on my accountability team each week, and just being able to follow you on social media. And I just thank you for being the man that you are.
Well, hey, thank you for being the man you are, the person you are, and thanks to all your listeners. And our vision as a firm at Think to Perform is to enhance the world. And I really value people like yourself, Brian, who are endeavoring to enhance the world. And to the extent we made a little bit of a difference today, that's a wonderful thing, because the world can use our help.
I agree.
Don't wait for somebody else to fix it.
We'll sleep better. We'll both sleep better tonight, Doug. I know
right.
I will. Can I speak to you?
You.
I know you have I know you have to go, but do you have 60 seconds after the recording for us to do a wrap up off air?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to wrap up. So, Doug, again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being such an amazing guest. And I literally mean amazing, on the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. It was really an honor.
For all of you audience out there, thank you again for tuning in to the Bamboo Lab podcast. I'm going to say it like I do every week. Please get out there and sculpt your life. Each day, strive to be a better version of yourself. Show love and respect to others. And get out there and live consciously and intentionally. I appreciate you all.